Okay, hello again. Well, I had a really good walk. I kept thinking about stuff to say in this video, and it's funny, a lot of that, the inspiration to talk has been largely fulfilled by me just doing it in my head. But one thing I did want to talk about is some spiritual, like, benchmarks along my spiritual path, along the path towards enlightenment, inner peace, being happy with this world, with myself. And my first 5 years were probably pretty happy, but from 5 to 30, it just kept getting darker and darker. And when I was 30, this whole gender dysphoria thing, this feeling of being in this prison, this male prison, it came to a head, and I, about in a 2-week period, contemplating transition and doing some research about it in 1999, I ended up deciding to transition, and this is a decision that happened, and I was really sick to my stomach really during those 2 weeks, but I finally committed and I gave myself over to it. And of course, some people would say, well, you failed because you didn't meet the standards that I would have liked. There was this one trans lady, she had these different stealth levels. Stealth was the ultimate, being, and she bragged that she was dating a retired Navy captain who would murder her if he found out she was trans. This was very validating to her, I guess. But anyway, so I transitioned, and I was hoping for completion, and I was left incomplete because it turns out the transition was necessary. I had to taste it, but it was insufficient to take me to the distance. It couldn't take me there. And that was a big letdown, but it was, and I grieved that. And so I looked for something else to give myself over to, because I remember how wonderful it was to give myself over to something, to give this life over to some sort of project, some sort of mission, something bigger than the self. And I ended up believing that enlightenment, that inner peace was possible, that enlightenment conveyed inner peace, that it has been done in the past, and that I could possibly do it myself, that this could happen here. And that's absolutely required. You have to actually believe it could be done, because otherwise you're not going to be, you're just not going to be pursuing that. Now, I know there's all sorts of, like, the Jim Newman school, the Tony Parsons schools. This is all verboten, speaking of it like this. I get where they're coming from on that, but basically, that was a huge milestone, but it's thus began my 19 years of deep despair, going through like a dark night of the soul, giving up God, giving up supernatural phenomenon, like the coping mechanism, comfort mechanisms of believing in such things, embracing what actually is, or trying to the best I could possibly can. And in 2012, so it was late 2005 when I came on the non-dual path, and 2012, sometime like spring, I remember thinking how my old Cartesian view of the universe had been supplanted, and now when I look at the universe, it looks like I am the universe. And yet, when I'm not thinking about it, when I'm not looking at it, it feels like I'm a separate individual in here. And so that was like kind of like a step in the right direction, or so I thought of it, as a step in the right direction. and so from 2012 to like 2019, or I think it was probably maybe 2020, I forget exactly the year, but it was a year I had this incredible, I was withdrawing from cannabis because I was periodically addicted to cannabis. I would get into a habitual use of cannabis, which is another story, but as I was getting off it, I was going through this horrible depression, horrible despair, horrible feelings of nihilism and nothingness, and it was just so horrible that I finally followed my teacher's advice to look for the source of the suffering, the actual source. I kind of skipped over finding my teacher, but I would always, he would say that, you know, in these YouTube videos, and everything I learned, I was from like YouTube and stuff, and his satsangs online. And I would always bypass the looking. I would look and then say, oh, it's consciousness, you know, or something like that. And this time, because I was so desperate, I'm thinking that's part of the causation, being so desperate. I'm gonna sneeze here in a second. That I was so desperate that I finally looked, and man, I had like a day of, it was like heaven at that same park I go to. And then that night I went to bed, and it was like bliss. And then at night I woke up and I was back in like this hellscape, nihilistic hellscape. And oh man, it was horrible, but it led me to this looking, to actually diligently look. And now backtracking a little bit here, around 2015, I came across the whole trauma healing path. And I was thinking that this spiritual seeking requires the looking within, right? You have to look within to see this stuff. And if you can't look within, maybe there's a bunch of like trauma, like dumpster fires going on in your present moment. Like if you can't sit still because you can't handle boredom, because boredom is suppressed feelings that are emerging in the moment, then how are you going to get anywhere? So basically, I came across Daniel Mackler's YouTube videos, and I started doing psychedelics to clear out a lot of this trauma. So my mind, I was thinking, like my teacher, when he talks about psychedelics, he talks about it, oh, it's valuable to see it once, maybe twice, but if you see it, take it any more than that, it's the same shit, different day. It's just an experience. You're not learning anything. You're not getting closer to reality or enlightenment or whatever. And maybe that's true, but I was looking at it from a point of view as I want to get rid of this dumpster fire so I can actually look. And so I use psychedelics for the purpose of, I mean, I love them, mainly ayahuasca, but to work on trauma, and it totally seemed to help me. And then in like March of 2024, not 2004, 2024. 2024 was a banner year because March of 24 was the moment that I no longer had a verbal inner critic. Where the verbal inner critic, where the went away. I mean, it's gone. I still had an emotional inner critic, but at least the verbal inner critic was done. It stopped. I stopped hearing that critical self-talk. I stopped having that critical self-talk, which was amazing. Amazing. And then later that year, it was November 3rd, actually, I was watching a Jim Newman video, and he how he teaches. I know he's not a teacher, right? Okay, but he's a non-teacher teacher, as I call him. But you can really feel the trapped animal with Jim Newman. It's like wild, especially if you're like highly caffeinated. That makes it even more. It enhances that trapped animal feeling, and that was happening. And then later, I came home and I watched this Advaita video about Atman Vachara and Ramana's "Who Am I?" And he was talking about how it's really more appropriate to say "What am I?" And I was going along with it, and I could feel that trapped animal like and attention pulled back from that sense of that consciousness is responsible for managing this life, this body mind mechanism. That consciousness is responsible. And I pulled back from it, and it like my entire perspective went whoop, like this. It was like my identity went from here down to here. It was like the size of a potato. I mean, and kind of shaped like a russet potato out at arm's length. It was funny. And it was like that whole sense that consciousness is responsible for managing things, whoop, goes down to this tiny size, and then attention pulls away from it even more, and then it rings out in terror, just absolute terror. But it's small terror because it's right here. It's no longer like this. It's small, and so as attention gets pulled away, that then opens up, and the fear is revealed as the peace that's always here, this peace that surpasses understanding. It's what is, it's just always here. And so, and what happened there is, at that moment, that sense of knowing that the dualistic delusion of independent authoring agency in this body, that falls away, that it no longer feels like there's a separate being in here looking out at a world out there, and it doesn't feel like we are one. It just doesn't feel separate. It feels whole, actually. And this sense of emptiness that I used to feel here back when I first got hot on the idea of inner peace, I imagined this inner Tahiti that Melville, that Wayne Dyer talked about, and that's what I wanted. And here it is, 2024, November 3rd, and that it happens, and it's been over a year, and this has not gone away. So it's like permanent. It seems like it. Maybe it will go away. I don't know. I don't know the future. But then something even more interesting happened. Like I've said before, that the seeker has gone, but the seeking remains. So there's still this, like, people call it integration, right? So maybe this is the integration. It sure seems like it. But my inner teacher basically instructed this consciousness to refine its inquiry, and what I do is, whenever there's an unmanageable feeling, it goes, can consciousness do anything about this? And I answer with my feelings, and the answer is always no, because consciousness is just consciousness. It can't do anything anyway. And I just kept at that, and just like a last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever, that sense that, like, if I made a mistake, I'd be like, oh, that was so stupid of me. How stupid, you know? I know that's kind of like an inner critic thing, but I didn't have, what I mean by the inner critic going, I mean just the ongoing dialogue like this, not the in the moment self-criticism when I make a mistake. But just recently now, when mistakes happen, I don't do that. And it feels so good. It feels like I'm now on my side. Now I'm on my side, finally, after all these years. I want this for you. I want this for you. I want you to feel this. I want you to feel this wholeness, to detect this wholeness, this peace that surpasses understanding. I want this for you. But you know what? This doesn't need you to have that, for this to have this. And it's just wild to me that could be the case. It's just so wild. It's just so amazing. It's just every day, it seems like every day is just getting better and better and better and better. It's just like exponentially better almost. That's what it almost seems like. It's just so wild that could be the case. Maybe it'll level off. Maybe it will go down. I do have bad days. I do get I do get seized by fear. Horrible fear that I try to do inquiry about. Because the inquiry is about unattaching, not detaching from what's real and true and what I need to be doing through evasion, but unattaching from illusion and delusion and things holding me back, things that have a track record of not getting me anywhere. All right, well, that's it. That's long enough. So talk to you later.